Those of you who are worried, if we turn to spiritual life, what will happen to our individuality? Your individuality is the one thing, sacred thing about you, but you don't now know what your individuality is. You are now hugging a surface individuality, a borrowed individuality as your own. When you discard this and take your stand on the locus of your own inner being and then progress, and then you participate in this becoming, and then he says, this person will be established here. He will be a unique manifestation of the divine. Each one of us has a sacred right to your personality, to your individuality. No two leaves are alike, no two individuals are alike, no two individuals have an identical manifestation. Each one of us is going to be a unique manifestation of the divine. And therefore he says, this constant will she covered with her sport. He covered it with a sport. It looks like all a game to evoke a person in the impersonal void. With the truth light, strike earth's massive roots of trance, wake a dumb self in the inconscient's depths, and raise a lost power from its python sleep, that the eyes of the timeless might look out from time, and the world manifest the unveiled divine. For this, it is for this perfection, for this perfect manifestation, he left his white infinity. He was all right in his infinity. He left that white infinity and laid on the spirit the burden of the flesh, that Godhead seed might flower in mindless space. This is a beautiful thing, tucked away in the midst of several other treasures, almost towards the end of this canto, Canto 4. Well, we now move on to Book 2, not because I have said all that can be said about the first three cantos of Ashwapati's Yoga, which are cantos 3, 4, 5 of Book 1, but I guess we have to move on. We have a schedule to keep to. So now I move on to Book 2. As you can see from the contents page, Book 2 is the largest book in this epic. It consists of 15 cantos, the book of the traveler of the worlds. Now it is this book with which we have been struggling here last 2 years when we meet and try to do it as much as possible line by line. We have now reached Book 2, Canto 9, and next time we meet, hopefully in August, we'll start at Canto 10 and go on hopefully end of Canto 15, which is complete Book 2. Now this is a book where Ashwapati is undertaking a journey of the several planes of consciousness. And these several planes of consciousness are called the various worlds. So Ashwapati explores the various worlds. Now what these worlds are, why is this exploration necessary, what is it that Ashwapati hopes to find through this exploration, these are things about which I think a few words may be said at this point. These are worlds representing the various planes of consciousness. Now, probably you know that Sri Aurobindo accepts this notion of evolution, not Darwin's notion of evolution, but what he calls this entire creation, he says, can be meaningful only if you look at it as a spiritual evolution of consciousness. What is happening here is a spiritual evolution of consciousness. This whole world is that. from the inconscient to the superconscient, from matter to the divine. That is the journey. And as we all know, if this journey has to be undertaken, you can't finish it in one life. And therefore, in Sri Aurobindo's approach, rebirth is a fundamental aspect. Individual's rebirth. Because in one life, as we know, we make so little progress. But the progress that has to be attained here is from the inconscient to the superconscient. This is the progress that has to be made. And so, rebirth or individual coming here again and again in different physical forms is a basic tenet of Sri Aurobindo's metaphysical belief. Now, this idea of spiritual evolution says that this world that you and I inhabit is not autonomous. It is not self-contained. This world is a part of a cosmic scheme. Now, the whole idea becomes easier to understand if you regard the creation itself as an embodiment of the divine. You see, there is the notion of God having created this world. And when you say God creates this world, very often we tend to use it like a potter creates a pot. When a potter creates a pot, the material he uses for creating this pot is not the potter's own body, but it is something else outside the potter. And the pot is not a part of the potter, the pot is outside the pot. So when the pot is broken, nothing happens to the potter is independent of the pot. Now, in the Vedantic concept, where we talk about creation, of course in some schools of Vedanta there is no talk about creation because there is no creation here. Shankara would say there is no creation. What you think creation is all an illusion. But there are other schools of Vedanta who talk about a creation. There, they look upon creation as a self-projection of the divine. The divine created the world means the divine became the world. So, what is this world? Divine himself becoming the world. Now, how does he become the world? Well, the whole idea, the Vedantic idea, is the one becoming the many. The one becoming the many. Now, for becoming the many, God could have become many in different ways, in different forms. But God chose one particular way of becoming. Why did he do so? Why did he choose this particular way? Well, this question can only be answered if you are God. We don't know why he chose this particular way, but he chose this particular way. And he became the very inconscient. Now, for God, who is, as we describe him, Sat, Chit, Ananda, to become inconscient, this plunge couldn't have been a sudden plunge. What must have happened is, just as we talk about evolution, Sri Aurobindo talks about a process of involution before evolution takes place. God takes a plunge, that is, all the effulgence, all the glory, all the superconscient characteristics of God's being gradually diminish one by one. They gradually lose their power. So there is a descending stair, as it were, along which the divine descends until he becomes the inconscient. Now, these various descending stairs are the various worlds. He talks about worlds at 7 levels. Matter, life, mind, this is the lower hemisphere. Then you have the world of Sat or Ananda, Chit and Sat. These are the worlds of the higher level. Intermediate between these two is the world of the supermind. So there are 7 levels, and these 7 levels are known to Indian tradition. You talk about 7 rivers, 7 life forces. There are always the seven rishis. These are the 7 worlds. Now, the superconscient became inconscient along these steps, as it were, And so, on earth, when the earth first began, after the Big Bang, we talk about the Big Bang, as you know, for several billion years after the Big Bang, the sun couldn't be formed, nothing could be formed. There was such chaotic flow of energy here. The sun himself, they describe, is a fifth generation star. Until then, even the sun couldn't cohere. Gradually this process took place, and someday the whirl of energy gradually formulated itself into this earth. And when the earth came, there was nothing here. There was no life, no mind, no human being. It was a vast, what we may call a vast desert land. But notice, this is only a seeming desert, because this earth itself, this so-called inconscient, is another form of the superconscient. It is another form of the divine. And because the divine is already implicit here, the divine is already hidden here, gradually it is inevitable that one by one the divine unfolds his consciousness. The first level came up when life comes up. Now, why should life come from matter? I don't think Darwinians have any answer. They would simply say life came because life came. There is nothing to explain, or they may say life is nothing but a complex form of matter. There is nothing called life. But those days are gone. They don't have that kind of confidence anymore. They say life is not all matter. There is something else that makes for life. How that comes, we don't know. Sri Aurobindo is very clear. Life comes from matter because life is already involved in matter. Life is simply released from matter. Similarly, mind comes from life because mind is already involved in life. Similarly, higher and higher levels of consciousness are bound to be revealed until at last the superconscient divine is also going to be revealed here, because that's already involved. So evolution, therefore, is an inevitable result of involution. Now, this is the basic idea, and he believes that this world, this earth, is not autonomous. Well, in many ways, Sri Aurobindo himself says, we don't need the mechanical Darwinian theory of evolution. And in 100 years of Darwin's theory, of course, modern science accepts basically the notion of evolution, but many of the things that Darwin talked about are not anymore acceptable. The very idea that there are these missing links, as they say, in the fossil record and so on. There are a number of things there which make Darwinian theory in its details unacceptable. But Sri Aurobindo says, I am not talking about Darwin's evolution. I am talking about spiritual evolution. Spiritual evolution is basically an evolution of consciousness. It's not an evolution of form. Science at best can talk about the evolution of form. Sri Aurobindo says the evolution of form is secondary. What is primary is the evolution of consciousness. When consciousness emerges, as you can see, the consciousness becomes more and more independent. Take, for example, a handful of earth or a rock and compare it with a plant. The plant also ultimately is matter. You can't question that. But it's a different grade of matter. It is kind of matter which has learnt how to draw sustenance with its roots from the earth, how to draw sustenance from the sun, from the rains, and how to convert this energy into leaves, into branches, into flowers, into fruit, and how to multiply itself. All this plant can do. So in one sense, as you can see, when life consciousness emerges, consciousness emerges, it is a matter all right, but it's a different kind of matter. Something else has been added to it. Similarly, when mind comes, like an animal, a plant, of course, if you cut the branch of a plant, it feels hurt, but it can't express itself. It can't say, please don't do this to me. It has to suffer whatever you do to it quietly, silently. But an animal, is more free. It can bark at you, it can run away from you, it can do all these things. So as you can see, a consciousness in the animal is more free. A consciousness in man is still more free. Man is freer than an animal. Animal is freer than a tree. A tree is freer than a handful of earth, a rock. What has happened is consciousness gradually unfolding itself. Now what is the difference between a chimpanzee and a man? The difference is just this, that man has what is called the mental consciousness. Chimpanzee has it in a very, very elementary form. As a result, you really have to work hard to teach a chimpanzee how to speak language, any kind of language. People have tried and have not succeeded. But in the case of a human being, it is difficult for a human child not to learn a language. Learning a language becomes absolutely natural to every child. How did this happen? Well, there is a consciousness called the mind that has come. As a result of this, all these faculties have come. So what Sri Aurobindo is trying to point out is, this is the evolutionary process. And for evolution to take place, as I said, this world is not autonomous, this world is not self-sufficient. Influences from other worlds keep impinging on this world. We always have influences acting on this world. Now this belief in other worlds is not either peculiar to Sri Aurobindo or peculiar to Hindu thought. All religions have talked about the other worlds. Whether you talk about Christianity or Islam, they always talk about the other worlds. Here, Sri Aurobindo accepts these other worlds as very real. But where are these other worlds? Where is the world of life? Where is the world of mind? In which map can we find them? Which travel agent will enable you to go to these places? These are questions based on a primary misunderstanding. This world is a world made out of matter. Now, matter is not the only kind of substance. There are other kinds of substances. Some are finer than matter. Life is a substance, mind is a substance, bliss is a substance, consciousness force can be a substance. So these different worlds that we talk about are not all made of matter. They are not made of matter at all. There is only one material world which you and I know. These other worlds that we talk about are finer worlds. They are larger worlds, but they are not material worlds. They are not physical worlds. They are worlds of life, worlds of mind. And how many of them are there? There are several of them. Later on you will see, Ashwapati sees a whole series of worlds piled up one on top of another. This is what he sees, and before he starts on his journey. And it is Sri Aurobindo's belief that before life can manifest here, two things have to happen. One is, there has to be sufficient readiness in the earth consciousness to receive life, and there has to be a response from the life world. So life world responds to this aspiration and life comes here. There is a constant interaction between our world and the other worlds. Very often there is an interaction between forces from the other worlds and your life and my life, but we don't know them. Unless you have occult knowledge, you won't know what mischief forces from other worlds are capable of creating here. Sometimes terrible things happen as a result of this mischief that is coming from other worlds. Take, for example, the Second World War, the terrible Second World War. It had an occult origin. It's not all to be something that can be explained very simply. Hitler, at one time, nobody took very seriously, but now that people have looked at records, people have looked at what kinds of things that Hitler did, people now know that whatever Hitler did was not something that he himself invented. He had occult guidance from Asuric forces, non-divine forces. So very often this world becomes a playfield of all these forces. Now, there are these worlds. If you have occult practices, if you are an adept in this, you can leave your body here and travel go to the various occult worlds. Mother, in many of her writings, talks about her visits to these occult worlds. It's possible, but it's not necessary. Now, Ashwapati, being a yogi, he wants to find out why is it that all the efforts of man to find perfection here on earth have failed. Is there anything wrong with the kinds of things that come to us from other sources? So he undertakes an exploration of all these different worlds, beginning with the subtle physical, then he comes to the various vital worlds, mental worlds, then worlds beyond the mind, and tries to find out if there is any principle, if there is any secret which we can borrow from these worlds, which will help man to transcend his present limitations, and comes to the conclusion there is nothing here really that will help man. Man has to go to find this principle from the transcendental source, and that is why he turns to the Divine Mother. So this second book, therefore, is an exploration of these various worlds. And we begin on Canto 1, which is called World Stair. Now, these 15 cantos are very, very difficult, and partly because they describe experiences which are extraordinary, which are purely yogic experience. This is almost an encyclopedia of occult knowledge here. Various kinds of things described. You and I have never been there, and therefore we kind of gape in wonder. But let me tell you, any time you spend looking at these cantos will be a very rewarding time, because in many, many places, Sri Aurobindo, through sheer poetry, recreates the experience of these worlds, and you will see and you will understand many things in the past. For example, when he looks at the world of life, he finds that desire is what is very basic to life, and we all want to get rid of desire. Everybody says if you want to be a yogi, you shouldn't have desires. But it's very interesting, if you really look at the vital world, and as Sri Aurobindo does, he also points out to you the great role desire played in the evolutionary journey. You see, everything after a certain time becomes unnecessary maybe, and you have to discard it. But in this God's world, there is nothing which is really superfluous. If we are tormented by desire, it is simply because at a certain stage in our evolution, desire was the only thing that saved us. This instinct to survive, the instinct to propagate, the will to live here, because we are all surrounded by death from all sides. And the early stages, this was the flag of evolution, was carried by desire. Desire was the helper. Desire is the bar. At a certain stage of evolution, desire becomes a bar. But at a certain stage of evolution, desire was a helper. So if you look at all these stages, as Sri Aurobindo does, your perspective on life is completely changed. You don't blame anything. You know, this ego, as he says, ego was the helper. Ego is a bar. Now, ego becomes a bar when a time has come for you to transcend the limitations of mental life and go beyond the mind. Then the ego is a bar. But in earlier stages, ego was what made you a personality. Without that, you would not have become a personality. So ego was the helper, ego is the bar. This is, in one sense, therefore, for a clear understanding of the evolutionary history, how man developed, along what lines. This is a wonderful guidebook, but let me assure you, this requires tremendous patience, going back again and again, reading it up several times. Most people give this advice, avoid book 2. you come back to it when you must. Don't be in a hurry to come to book 2. But here we decided we will follow the chronological order. We'll do book 1 first and then book 2. It doesn't matter. This is Sri Aurobindo's journey, so we'll get to know something of it. So this in fact is the brief background to what these worlds are, why Ashwapati does what he's doing, and why then he has to go beyond the worlds to the transcendental supreme Mahashakti and ask her to send her something which the world doesn't yet have. That is why he goes to the Supreme Mother. But before that, we'll see a little bit. As I said, I have decided to devote to this just 2 talks, because even 20 talks won't be adequate, just to give you some idea what this is all about. Let us look at the very first canto, where we have some idea what this is all about. Page 98, beginning of page 98. There, walled apart by its own innerness, in a mystical barrage of dynamic light, he saw a lone, immense, high-curved world pile. It's a pile of worlds, world pile, erect like a mountain chariot of the gods, motionless under an inscrutable sky. This is what Ashwapati sees, a pile of worlds, worlds upon worlds, piled up like that, like a chariot of the gods, he says. Erect like a mountain chariot of the gods, motionless under an inscrutable sky, as if from matter's plinth and viewless base to a top as viewless, a carved sea of worlds, climbing with foam-maned waves to the supreme, ascended towards breadths immeasurable. It hoped to soar from into the ineffable's reign. 100 levels raised it to the unknowns. How many worlds were there? Hundreds of them. They're not 1 or 2, hundreds of them. But basically belonging to 7 planes of consciousness. A little later, down the same line, how did Ashwapati go there? How did Ashwapati go into this world? Because they are all worlds outside, right? Did he take a helicopter? What did he do? Well, there is something very interesting. The microcosm and the macrocosm. The world outside and the world within man have more or less the same structure. So if you want to understand the structure of the world outside, the life worlds, the vital worlds, the mental worlds, you don't have to go anywhere except go within you. So Ashwapati goes within his own consciousness to explore these other worlds. That's why he says, a summary of the stages of the spirit, its copy of the cosmic hierarchies, refashioned in our secret air of self, a subtle pattern of the universe. A subtle pattern of the universal structure is also found in the structure of our own consciousness. So Ashwapati doesn't go anywhere, he goes within himself. By going within himself, he is able to explore the various worlds. And where does he go? It is within, below, without, above. What is this? Consciousness. The basic reality behind this entire universe, entire creation is consciousness. Acting upon this visible nature scheme, it wakens our earth matter's heavy dose to think and feel, to react to joy. It models in us our diviner parts, lifts mortal mind into a greater air, makes yearn this life of flesh to intangible aims, links the body's death with immortality's call. Out of the swoon of the inconscience, it labors towards a superconscient light. Out of the swoon of the inconscient, up to the superconscient, it is the consciousness, it is the stairway of consciousness that you find here. If earth were all, if there were only matter and there were no consciousness, if earth were all and this were not in her, thought could not be, nor life delight's response. Only material forms could then be her guests, driven by an inanimate world force. Then materialists would be right. The only truth about this world is matter. But we can't say that anymore because we have other worlds, other realities. And all these realities are made out of one thing, and that is consciousness. These are various manifestations of consciousness. The inconscient is one end of this consciousness. The divine is another end of this consciousness. So there is nothing which is non-divine here. Even matter is divine, and therefore you don't have to deny matter and accept the spirit. Both are two ends of the same reality, two manifestations of the same reality with intermediate links to it: life, mind, supermind, and the world of bliss, consciousness force, and truth. This is what is described here. Earth by this golden superfluity bore thinking man, and more than man shall bear. Because of this, out of a handful of dust, as it were, nature has been able to fabricate man. And because of this presence of consciousness, more than man it shall bear. A creature greater than man will one day arrive here. That is for certain. So he says, earth by this golden superfluity bore thinking man, and more than man shall bear. This higher scheme of being is our cause and holds the key to our ascending fate. This is the secret of evolution. Consciousness gradually ascending, manifesting higher and higher grades of its own beauty, of its own strength, of its own awareness. Now, how did this world come about? How did this world of inconscient come about? That also is explaining on page 99. Once, in the vigil of a deathless gaze, these grades are marked her giant downward plunge. These various worlds mark the stages by which the divine decided to take a plunge. When the divine took a plunge, he didn't, like a diver, dive from the springboard right into water. He lost his effulgence, his beauty, stage by stage, and that is how these worlds were created. That's why he says, these grades had marked her giant downward plunge, the wide and prone leap of the Godhead's fall. That is why our life is a holocaust of the Supreme. The Supreme has sacrificed himself and become this world. The great world mother, by her sacrifice, has made her soul the body of our state. Accepting sorrow and unconsciousness, divinity slaps from its own splendor's woe the many-patterned ground of all we are. All that we are here is ultimately from the Supreme. It's the Divine Mother's holocaust. It is the Purusha's holocaust that has created this world.